Back. Okay, good. So it's gone. I'm Tony Kube. I'm the national manager for the Catholic Bishops Justice for Immigrants campaign. I think you might be seeing a chat box at the bottom of your screen there. It says John Galata. Well, I am not John Galata. I'm Tony Kube. But in that chat box as well is where you can ask your questions for the presenters today. Presenting today will be, first off, Sarah Hoff. She is our new care coordinator, national program coordinator for the USCCB. Joining her are a couple of great folks in dioceses. The first person is Sister Tracy Horan. She's with Faith in Indiana, and Martin Ford, who is with the Archdiocese of San Francisco. So thank you for joining us this 27th of November. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah to begin the webinar in earnest. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks, Tony. If you could advance the slide once, that'd be great. Okay, so just to start off, I'm just going to give first a brief overview of what we're going to cover in this program. So first I'm going to go through a little bit about what is the CARE program, and then talk about who's participating in it currently, and why this program is really important now, especially in our current immigration and enforcement reality here in the U.S. And then we're going to go on and hear from Sister Tracy and then Martin about the work that they're doing in their communities in Indianapolis and then San Francisco, respectively, in conjunction with the CARE program. And then at the end, we're going to have a little bit of time for questions if you have any. So first and foremost, I want to have Sister Tracy. She's going to give a little faith reflection just to start us off. So Tony, if you could advance the slide once. So Sister Tracy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm just really excited this is something we've been talking about for some time now. How can we as Catholics really respond and accompany our immigrant neighbors in vulnerable spaces? And reflecting on that, this being really a faith-based effort and preparing for our first Sunday of Advent coming up, I've just been really aware of Mary's role in the unfolding of God's presence with us, and that model of what it means to encounter and to accompany. And so I wanted to just bring our attention to the story of the visitation, thinking about Mary being in this places of uncertainty for her as an unwed pregnant mother with child, and reaching out to Elizabeth, her relative, for guidance and for presence, for reassurance. And then Elizabeth's response, rejoicing in that presence of God within Mary. So I'm just really touched by how in that encounter she really truly saw Mary, to the point that it actually impacted her physically. So I want to take a moment as we're beginning this conversation and this holy work to invite each of us to take a moment to call to mind a time in our own lives when we felt powerless, when we felt fearful, and in that moment when someone really saw us. And I just want to invite us to remember what that encounter felt like. To remember how God's presence was made known through that person. And with that encounter in mind, I'm just going to read this scripture aloud from Luke chapter 1. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the infant leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth, filled with the Holy Spirit, cried out in a loud voice and said, "Most blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." And so as we share around what it means to accompany one another and to really see one another in these vulnerable moments, I just invite us to return to this witness of Mary and Elizabeth, of deep encounter that we're called to in being present with one another. Amen.
Amen. Sarah and Sister Tracy and Martin, before we continue, a couple of folks have shared some information here. If you're using a microphone instead of the telephone on your end, and I'm talking to the presenters here for the webinar, please speak into your microphone. They're having some difficulty hearing. The audio is breaking up, is what Sister Barbara is telling us. So hopefully this will improve. Sister JT, Sister Barbara, please let us know. Let me know. Type it in the chat box if you're still having difficulty hearing. So, okay. Go ahead, Sarah. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Sister Tracy. Tony, if you could go one slide forward, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to give a little background about what the CARE program is. And so the CARE stands for the Catholic Accompaniment and Reflection Experience. And it's a new pilot initiative that's being launched by the USCCB and Migration and Refugee Services here. And CARE is committed to connecting Catholic volunteers as well as men and women religious with undocumented individuals, unaccompanied children, and their families who are in need of accompaniment and emotional, social service, and spiritual support in their community. And so the CARE program works at the diocesan level to facilitate a larger accompaniment movement, and it's really there to ensure that each individual who is supported has the support they need every step of the way through their experience, whether that be in integrating into the community, if they need help with enrolling their children into school, or with accompaniment work, like accompanying an individual to their ICE check-ins or immigration hearings. It could also be giving someone a ride, helping them find legal assistance, so different things like that. And so CARE, the aim of CARE is to empower undocumented and mixed status families and local community supporters, and to raise awareness and educate different populations in the community at large about current immigration realities throughout the U.S. and advocate for change, and also for an increased leadership of these groups in their communities. Next slide, please, Tony. So who is participating in CARE? So currently, the Archdiocese of San Francisco and the Archdiocese of Indianapolis are the pilot sites for the initial CARE program kickoff. And in conjunction with them, Faith in Indiana and Catholic Charities of San Francisco are also partnering with them to support the program in those locations. And both archdioceses have been successful in the past and present with fostering community-based solutions to help serve immigrant families. And additionally, both archbishops in those archdioceses have voiced their strong support for the program and its goals of accompaniment, solidarity, and encounter. Also, the two archdioceses will serve as mentors to new sites that will be added as the program further develops. Next slide. So why launch this program now? So recently, we have seen the Trump administration make drastic changes to who is considered a priority for removal in the United States. And so in his January 2017 executive order on enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States, we have seen new enforcement priorities that prioritize not only undocumented immigrants who have committed acts that are a chargeable criminal offense, but also anyone who has an outstanding order of removal. So this really means that anyone who does not have legal status in the United States is at risk for deportation. And that includes people such as long-standing community members, those who are productive members of society, who are law-abiding, mothers and fathers. They are all now face the possibility of being deported. And this could lead and is leading to an increasing number of families who are being separated and communities that are being disrupted. And also kind of stemming off of that, we are seeing an increase in arrests of immigrants throughout the U.S. And so according to a 2018 report done by the American Immigration Lawyers Association, they found that the arrests of immigrants with no criminal convictions in 2017 have increased 146% from 2016, while arrests of immigrants with criminal convictions have increased only at 12%. So that's a drastic increase of people who are just trying to make their best in the country, mothers and fathers, people who are productive in the country. Also, according to Immigrant Legal Resource Center, since 2017, the number of 287G agreements nearly doubled, with many more agreements pending review. And so this program is, if you don't know already, is a partnership between the federal government and local and state law enforcement that allows local and state law enforcement officers to question persons' immigrant status, to arrest them for immigration violations, and to detain them, to provide time for ICE to take them into custody. And so this program can often create confusion and mistrust between members of the community and local law enforcement, hindering local law enforcement's ability to protect and serve the community. And so this program was created under the Bush administration and promoted early on in the Obama administration, but it was rolled back then. But President Trump has encouraged its implementation even more so today. Next slide, please. And so some more recent developments that have happened. So there are possible DHS funding increases. And so some of these increases include in the President's fiscal year 2019 budget, it would include $2.8 billion for 52,000 immigration detention beds and $570.9 million for 2,000 additional ICE personnel and 1,312 support personnel. And so if Congress gives DHS the funds requested in this budget, we would see a substantial increase in the enforcement capacity and staffing of the government. And that could lead to even more deportations of people. And so finally, the last point that I have here is the MOA, or Memorandum of Agreement, between the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services. And so this is another change that is having drastic negative impacts on immigrant populations in the U.S. And the MOA mandates that continuous information sharing on unaccompanied immigrant children from the time ICE or CBP takes them into custody through their release from OR, or Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is an office of the Department of Health and Human Services. So the information shared also includes information on the children's potential sponsors, usually the child's family members, as well as anyone else living with the sponsor. And so this MOA is a dramatic change from past practices relating to unaccompanied children, and it could put children in danger and at risk for abuse and trafficking as potential sponsors become less willing to come forward, meaning that unaccompanied children could also end up spending longer time in detention facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I want to hand the floor over to Martin Ford. He's a social action coordinator with the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and he's going to tell you a little about the work that they've started doing with the CARE program there. So Martin?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just first of all, can you hear me? Very important.
Yeah, hear you just fine, Martin. Go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. I just want to apologize in advance. I'm at the apex of a cold right now. So if you hear me sniffling and coughing and sneezing in the middle of this presentation, I will beg your forgiveness it sounds really disgusting. So my name is Martin Ford, and I just wanted to say just a few things about myself before I go on. First of all, I'm a San Francisco native, born and raised here in the Mission District. And I'm actually half Mexican, even though my last name is Ford. That always throws people off. My family comes from the state of Jalisco, which is a very Irish, Italian, Polish state. So not unusual to have like people with the last name Ford from that state. I come from the tech background, startups. I worked for Virgin America for a while, and other tech companies. And one of my latest jobs was working at a parish as a business manager. I decided I wanted to do a little bit more for God. And one of the things that I learned at that parish, I'm really glad that Sister Tracy showed that quote. That theme of vulnerability is just something that really, it's been a recurring thought in my prayer life the last few years, particularly because of that parish I was working at. This parish that I worked at has a perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, and I just think it's really beautiful that Christ, that God in His wisdom, decided to give Himself to us in such a vulnerable way. I mean, sometimes I'd be in that Blessed Sacrament chapel by myself, and I'd be like, wow, somebody could just come in and walk away with that monstrance, and which would be very sad. But it's so beautiful how God makes Himself vulnerable to us as kind of a sign of His love, and likewise, I mean, we're supposed to follow that model, and I think that participation in the CARE program is a great way to show that vulnerability. So,
hey Martin, I'm sorry,
yeah.
Martin, I'm sorry to interrupt. I got a note here. You're breaking up a little bit, so can you speak into your microphone or into the telephone a little bit more, a little bit closer?
Sure.
Great. Great.
Is this better?
I think so. Looks like it's okay.
We'll find out, huh?
Okay. Thanks,
Okay,
Martin.
good.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, not at all. So anyway, so the Archdiocese of San Francisco and Catholic Charities are joining forces to implement this CARE program within San Mateo County of San Francisco, and basically, I wanted to take this kind of this mission statement and kind of boil it down into one little more concise sentence. Just because I'm a little slow, I need things to be short. Basically, our goal was to connect unaccompanied minors with good families, and this is important because there's two main reasons why this is so important, according to me. I have there's a negative component to it. If we have these children coming to the United States, they lose a lot of their social structures, and they become really vulnerable to other people who would be happy to help them. I'm talking about gangs. I'm talking about other kinds of unsavory people. So from a negative standpoint, it's a bad thing. From a positive standpoint, it's without a program such as CARE, we deprive a lot of children of being able to reach their God-given potential. I mean, if you're able to help children along, we're in a very vulnerable state with things that a lot of other children might take for granted. You're able to help them become what God really wants them to be. And I just really quick, I want to tell you a little story about my own family. So my grandmother and my father moved to San Francisco when my dad was 12 years old. And he went to St. Paul's Church in San Francisco. That's also where I was baptized. If you've ever seen the film Sister Act, that's where it was filmed, St. Paul's. And after only being in San Francisco for 2 years, the pastor of St. Paul's called my grandmother and said, hey, I met this kid. He's about 16 years old. He's exiled from North Korea. He doesn't speak a lick of English, and he just needs somebody to help him do some really simple things. So my grandmother, very heroic, godly woman, didn't just want to help in little ways. She wanted to take him in. So my grandmother was already a very poor woman. She exiled my father from his bedroom. My dad had to sleep in the living room, and gave this child, or this teenager really, a teenager from Korea, his room, and ended up staying there for about 8 months until he could get his stuff together. Many years later, this Korean gentleman he owns many other cool things. He owns a parking garage. A very successful man in worldly terms. But on top of that, even more importantly, he's a very active member of his church community. A very thankful person. He's always giving things. He's a very charitable person. And he always turns back to my grandmother to thank her. For helping him when he was so vulnerable coming into this country. So anyway, I've seen firsthand how important it is to help people in these vulnerable stages. So going back to San Francisco today, what are we doing? So as I said before, this is a partnership between Catholic Charities and the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and the division of labor is as follows. Basically, Catholic Charities is handling most of the project management. They right now in the county of San Mateo have 72 kids under their care for a variety of different reasons, and they're looking for people to come and help them as mentors and whatnot. So that's where the Archdiocese of San Francisco comes in. Our goal is to be connectors. We want to connect these 72 kids with good faithful Catholic families within the Archdiocese of San Francisco. Hopefully, close to them within the county of San Mateo. So so what are some of the challenges in this recruitment process? Because that's kind of what we're doing. We're recruiting. A lot of people don't see. It's not that people are against this. They just don't see why it's really important, and particularly why it's important for them personally. So there's a lot of good people out there with goodwill, good intentions. But hey, how does this compete with all the other ways I might be called to serve the church? So a lot of it is really just based on the fact that a lot of us can see a lot of these problems as very abstract. We don't see there's actually people behind these faces. So one very practical thing that Catholic Charities in San Mateo did is she had her husband take photographs of a lot of these kids. Beautiful. He's a professional photographer. Took very beautiful pictures of these kids and just showed them to people, just so that people can see that these are actually real human beings we're dealing with. This isn't just an abstract problem. These are images and likeness of Jesus Christ, who through divine providence have come to our archdiocese, which means that we have a duty, we have a God-given duty to reply to their needs, to respond to their needs. And so that's been a challenge, just reminding people that these are people, not problems. So there's three things that we're looking for in families. Number one, that they're safe and vetted. We don't ever want a vulnerable child to anything less than a top quality family. Sexual molestation, you don't want to worry about any of these kinds of things. So that's number one. Number two, we're looking for Catholic families. Yes, it is true that this is partially because most of the children, though not all of them, do come from Catholic families. It's not just for that, but it's also for us. We're looking for Catholic families because we feel that we are called to have our people, our Catholics, rise up to the occasion for helping these people. The Mormons are doing a lot. God bless the Mormons for stepping up their game. We Catholics have to do the same. And then from our last meeting, we also found it to be really important to find families that speak at least some Spanish. When being able to communicate with these children is very important. So some very excited, Holy Spirit-filled people want to help it. Some of them don't speak any English. Some speak no Spanish at all. So it becomes a bit of a challenge. So what have we been doing practically to make this vision actually happen? Well, the first thing that we've been doing is we've been visiting deanery meetings. We haven't visited any in San Mateo yet. That's happening in December. Oddly enough, going to these deanery meetings within San Francisco have been really fruitful for us because we see that there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of pastors who really want to see care implemented at their parishes. Unfortunately, right now we're kind of limiting our scope to San Mateo County. By the way, for those of you who've never been to the San Francisco Bay Area, the Archdiocese of San Francisco is divided into 3 counties. So San Mateo County is south of San Francisco, and it covers part of Silicon Valley and some of the poor parts of the Bay Area too, such as East Palo Alto. There's movies about East Palo Alto. So yeah, that's we're visiting deanery meetings, trying to get the word out among pastors, and trying to communicate to them how they can, what kind of families that we want them to look for. Another really cool thing is that we're taking advantage of of our own Archbishop, who is very much a big fan of this program. He's backed it completely, and he's going to write a letter to all of our pastors, just encouraging them to get their parishioners involved in this. I'm sorry. Let me correct myself. Specifically in San Mateo, that's what we're looking at. We're also looking into getting the Knights of Columbus and the Knights of Malta involved. The Knights of Columbus actually reached out to us, saying that they wanted to be involved in this program, which is great. We're also doing some independent website, social media, newspaper things to get the word out for this program, which is very good. The great thing about the Archdiocese of San Francisco is we have a big pulpit. We have a lot of reach, so we want to take advantage of that. One problem that we are seeking to overcome, again, going back to that first thing I said about this being about people, not problems, is that a lot of people don't have an opportunity to ever meet any of these children. See, I'm fortunate. My family comes from Mexico, so I've got a lot of families. I've got a lot of family members who don't speak English, and they've been able to get help with many things. But a lot of people don't grow up in the same kind of culture that I did. They grow up with different people. They've never met children who are new to our country. So we also like to set up some activities to kind of bring these kids out in the open in a safe way, obviously, to get to know people. The Archbishop has expressed interest in taking the kids out to see a Giants game, which I think is really cool. So back to to show like a division of labor. Catholic Charities is running the program, so I can't answer too many questions about specifics related to running the program. But the Archdiocese, our big thing is getting the word out and trying to connect Catholic Charities with good channels of people. I think that's all I wanted to say. I think at the end of Sister's presentation, we'll probably answer questions, right?
Well, there is one for you right now, Martin, if that's okay with you and Sister Tracy.
Sure.
That way we can break it up a little bit here. The question is from Michael Starks. Which council or councils of the Knights of Columbus have shown an interest in participating? And Martin, if you don't have the answer, you can get back to me, and I can send it off to Michael.
Sure. There's 4 councils. The only one that I remember by heart is Star of the Sea St. Joseph's Council, and there are a few other ones too.
I'm writing that down now. Star of the Sea St. Joseph's Council.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. Let's see, folks. I think you found where the chat box is. So if you have any other questions as we're going to continue through the webinar here, please just go ahead and type them into the chat box. Sarah, Sister Tracy, do you want to go ahead and continue here from here then?
Yeah, that works for me. So
okay.
next, yeah.
Go ahead.
Next,
Sarah.
up is Sister Tracy Horan. So she's a bilingual organizer with Faith in Indiana, and she's going to be talking about the work that is being done in Indianapolis. So, Sister Tracy?
Great, thanks. Can everybody hear me? Sarah and Tony?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing well.
Great.
You're doing
Okay.
just fine.
So I think we could go ahead to the next slide.
Okay.
So this has been really exciting for us. Since the inception of our organization, Faith in Indiana, was previously known as IndyCan, and we all along we work for racial and economic justice. And since its inception, we've had a really strong relationship with the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. And so it's just been a real privilege as we've seen, as Sarah was talking about, these executive orders rolling out and seen the fear rising up in the immigrant families in our churches. It's been a privilege to walk with the leadership of the Archdiocese and see that strong support and what that's meant to families. So over the past year, we have really started to lay the groundwork in response to a lot of folks who had been coming to us and really experiencing firsthand those increases. Here in Marion County, we saw actually a doubling of the use of ICE detainers, so basically detaining people who are undocumented. And so we started responding, and so we're officially launching in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis now, and at the same time we have been sort of laying the groundwork for this to start training people and see what we could do, both in supporting and being a physical presence to make sure that no one stands alone in the face of a lot of the fear immigrant families are feeling, and at the same time to translate those transformational experiences into some real systemic change. So to just give you an overview, it's been really exciting. We do interfaith work, and a lot of our Catholics are leading the way. So we have had 116 individuals participate in 11 accompaniments with 6 immigrants over the past year. And I'll kind of share a little bit about what those different accompaniments have looked like and give some examples in a minute. And it's been powerful, particularly that 29 of those individuals have been clergy from various denominations, women and men religious, and that that particular expression of support in that leadership has been crucial. At the same time, we have been training teams of people, so over 237 faith leaders have been trained in responding and in accompaniment and showing up for people who are in situations where they feel afraid to go to court, to show up at an ICE check-in. And that through those accompaniments and that laying the groundwork, these sort of initial highlighting of this work, we've seen that 60% of the immigrants that we accompanied have been able to stay with their families. So we have seen some people that even after being accompanied were deported, and that's part of the challenge of this work, is that we're in that vulnerable place with families, knowing that we're doing what we can to be present and that we believe our presence does have an impact, and at the same time there is that unknown about what the outcome will be. So you can switch to the next slide. So just to give you a sense of the variety, so for those of you who are thinking, what might this look like in my diocese, in my archdiocese, in my community, we have seen a variety of people who reach out to us through, we have a rapid response hotline because someone in their family or they themselves are facing a court date. So some of those have been local civil courts, so people who have been pulled over and were driving without a license and are afraid to show up in court by themselves. people who have had an order of deportation in the past. As Sarah mentioned, there's a whole set of people who were not considered a priority under the previous administration. And so they might have an order of deportation, but in the past, ICE would say, well, you can just come back and check in with us every year, and that hasn't been an issue. But those folks now are finding when they come for their regular check-in date that they're sometimes being detained. And so we've accompanied a couple of folks who have had ICE check-ins. We have some who are seeking a different type of relief, whether it's asylum, whether it's a U visa. I didn't list this, but we actually had someone who was applying for DACA and was just nervous to go to this public office by themselves with all of their documents and identification. And then ISAP supervision was an interesting one. So we have locally, and this is something that I'm not sure if Father Larry is on the line, but I might ask him to share a little bit more about that. We have locally an office that contracts with ICE to lead these supervision appointments with immigrants who are in the process of potentially being deported. And so we had a lot of experiences with that and people going for appointments and being afraid. And so I'll share a little bit more about some specifics on that, but that's just to give you a sense of the variety of different things people have been seeking accompaniment for. Next slide, please. So this is a photo of earlier this year, a group of people, including a few pastors from different backgrounds and a number of people from St. Philip Neri, a Catholic church on the east side. A young man named Horacio was detained at his home earlier this year. And he is just a leader in his congregation. He's actually a personal friend of mine, well known in the community, and has been living in the U.S. for decades. But after a misdemeanor, he came on ICE's radar, and so they eventually tracked him to his house and detained him one day. And so he was detained for 40 days, and then this is a photo of the day when he had his final court hearing. And you can see all of us smiling because at that court hearing in Chicago, Horacio wasn't there. He was there via video camera, so he could see us and we could see him, but he wasn't present. And the judge did accept the request for Horacio to get a stay of removal for 6 months to work on his case. So that was a powerful example, and you could tell the way the judge interacted with us that he was impressed at how many people were showing up, traveling all the way to Chicago from Indianapolis to be present for Horacio, and what that said about him as a member of the community. Next slide. So, when we talk about accompaniment, often that means being physically present in a courtroom, but I wanted to give one example of something that is just a little bit different. So we worked with the family of Juan Hernandez. When I met his wife, Rosa, when she reached out to us, Juan had already been detained and was on his way to being deported. And at that time, the main issue that she was concerned about was that he was having health issues while detained and wasn't getting the medical treatment he was requesting. And so the way that we expressed accompaniment in this case was to actually have a call-in day and to express our concern for Juan as the broader community. And so in the end, Juan was deported, but he did get the medical help that he was seeking. Next slide. So I want to share a little bit about, I'm actually going to invite Michelle Matthijs, who's a member of St. Monica Catholic Church, to share a little bit more, but I'll just give you an overview. We have two photos here. The one on the right, you can see in the middle, the woman with the microphone is Sonia Aviles, and she's originally from El Salvador and was actually deported earlier this year, but this photo is from about a year and a half ago. She shared her testimony as part of a May Day March for Immigrants and Workers. And this was just a couple days before she had her ICE check-in. And she was sharing what that felt like for her as a mother, as a wife, as someone who'd lived in the country for years, to be facing the fear of going to that ICE check-in. And so we accompanied her. So, and then the picture on the left is once when Sonia was detained earlier this year, we organized a vigil at the center in Brazil where she was being detained, the county jail, to show our support along with her husband, Elmer. So Michelle, if you could just jump in and share what that experience was like for you.
Sister Tracy, I don't think Michelle can can get on.
Oh, really? Okay.
Unfortunately, yeah, because this line is only available to participants or presenters. I'm sorry.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But Michelle, if you want to, you can type something really quickly in the chat box there, and we can share it with everyone.
Okay. Should I, or I could send her the phone number to call in. Sorry, I didn't realize there was a separate line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're limited to the number of lines
Gotcha.
that we have for presenters.
Okay. Well, I'll just share. Michelle and I had talked about this earlier this week, and she was sharing with me what it was like for her because she actually had accompanied Sonia to her check-in, and from one year to the next, the difference. So the first time when Michelle accompanied her, we had this prayer the night before, and then, everyone was kind of preparing themselves, and then she went to her check-in, and there was no issue. She just got to sign a paper, and everything was okay. And then the following year, they had to go through the same process again, and this time she was detained. And so Michelle just shared a little bit about what it was like to, we walked around, circles around, knowing that Sonia was being detained in that facility and that Michelle had come to know her and, had hugged her in person, and then and that she was being kept in this place, and also what it was like to hear Sonia's husband share how he felt that day, and really the sign that he had that said, "I heart Sonia." It was just a beautiful expression of love, and so to have that unique perspective that most people don't have going through that experience, accompanying families who are dealing with that directly. So next slide. And I'll share, I think this next picture, so this is a family from Holy Spirit, one of our churches on the east side of Indianapolis. And I want to say a little bit more about, what happens when families take leadership and share their stories. So this is Eduardo, and he was detained as a result of an ICE detainer, which is a document that is sent to a local jail, and they essentially ask to hold on to a person. If you get this person in your custody, can you hold on to them for a few extra days? So at that point, they're being held without cause. And so what was really moving about Eduardo was that, on a number of occasions, he has shared his story at different gatherings that we've had with Faith in Indiana and with the Archdiocese. And then he was willing to actually be part of a news story that kind of uncovered what was happening with holding immigrants without cause in Indianapolis, that then led to ending ICE detainers in Marion County. And so it was just a really powerful cycle. We had folks who accompanied him. He was also seeking a U visa. And so, again, had these regular check-ins, and the folks that the church members who were able to accompany him then could celebrate that when he did get his U visa, and that really bonded them, and having seen him go through those different steps. And it also resulted in some real systemic change as a result of him sharing his story. Next slide. Actually, I'm going to skip to the next one, I think. Thank you. Great. So this, I want to lift up a little bit as well the importance of the leadership of people of faith, and also of women and men religious, of clergy, of bishops. So this is a picture of our Archbishop Charles Thompson accompanying Erica Fierro. Erica had lived in the U.S. for 30 years, had 2 kids that were born in the U.S., and has been a leader in really a number of actually Indianapolis congregations. And her husband got a traffic ticket, and that's what put them on the radar of ICE. And so her husband was detained, and it's kind of a long story, but Erica then, as a result of that encounter, was on ICE's radar as well. And so this is a picture of the group gathered in front of the ICE, the Immigration Supervision Office that I mentioned, contracts with ICE. And we had 3 different times that we actually accompanied, actually maybe 4 or 5 times. So we accompanied Erica to these appointments. And it was really, we learned a lot through the process. And actually the Archbishop, on this occasion, they requested to actually go into the office with her, and then were denied, and then were told that they would be cited for trespassing if they didn't leave. And so the folks who participated in this particular accompaniment were really impacted in that they they felt kind of jarred by that experience and by, the reality of a system that is trying to, taking steps to keep people from need. And so it was putting themselves in a vulnerable position as well to have clergy that were willing to take a risk in just being present with people who are in these moments not knowing. We didn't know that day if Erica would be detained or not. And since that day, Erica, we believe that our accompaniment gave her a little bit more time to get her kids' passports in order, but she then was deported eventually later in the summer. So just wanted to lift that up as a powerful example. And there were countless news stories that happened as a result of Erica's willingness to share her story and everything that was going on with her family. And it became to the point that, people just knew Erica by name in the city of Indianapolis. And we had a yard sale with her as she was, selling her belongings and preparing to be deported. And people would just drive up and give a donation. And they would say, this is for Erica. And they had never met her, but they had heard her story. They had seen her in the news. And so it was a way that really people were able to experience the story of a real person, to see the humanity that existed in her and her family's struggle. And so even on the policy side of things, we had folks who visited some of our congressional offices last week talking about the money that's being put into the deportation machine. And people brought up, we had members of Congress who actually mentioned Erica by name and that they had been following her story and that they really, were concerned about things like that were happening in our community. So beyond this, the examples of people, being present to folks, we see the ripple effect and the broader systemic impact that this has when we're disrupting, what the dominant narrative of who immigrant families are in our communities. Next slide. That might be my last slide. I'm not sure, actually.
I think it is, Sister Tracy.
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. So Sister Tracy, Michelle did respond, and I'm just going to go ahead and read what she typed in the chat box here for folks. It's very heartfelt. So thank you, Michelle. And what Michelle typed is, I felt helpless seeing the distress and fear my fellow parishioners were feeling. I saw accompanying immigrant brothers and sisters like Sonia, Juan, and Erica Fierro as something we can do as individuals to affect change. Even if our prayers are not answered the way we would like, there's also value in lifting up those in need and carrying them in our hearts. So that's a great example of someone sharing their experience, and I applaud you folks in Indianapolis as well as in San Francisco. So, Sarah, do you want to go ahead and continue then?
Sure. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
And so kind of just to conclude, I wanted to include some resources that we have about the CARE program. So I have linked here. There's the CARE program webpage. There's other backgrounders that we have about the CARE program, about the Catholic Church and Accompaniment, also about if you want to learn more about immigration enforcement in the interior of the U.S., we also have that available. And also online on that webpage are Spanish translation of all these backgrounders. And this is all available on Justice for Immigrants website. And I also just want to plug really quick that Sister Tracy and myself will be attending the JFI National Conference that's going to be here in Virginia, Arlington, Virginia, December 5th and 7th, and we will be speaking about the CARE program there. So if you're going to be attending that, we would love to talk to you more about the program there and how you can get involved. And also, if you are not going to be able to attend or you just feel like emailing me, you can email me. My email is listed here if you're interested in possibly participating or just learning more about the CARE program and kind of what we see for the future with it. And with that, I think we go to the next slide. And if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, please feel free to do so in the chat area, or you can always email me with any follow-up questions that you have.
Yeah, and folks, Sarah did mention the CARE website, which is on the Justice for Immigrants website. It's this. I put the link into the CARE website. It's the second to the last note there in the chat box, and I also added Sarah's email, which is the last message in the chat box. So feel free to cut and paste those into your browsers for later on, or Sarah's email into your address book. But we still have 5-6 more minutes where we can take questions from folks. Just go ahead and type it in the chat box. There's some good experience on the telephone, and I'm sure they want to. They're willing to share some of their best practices with you all. I'm not going to cut it off because I see that a couple of folks are typing now. The chat box is informing me that a couple of folks are typing. So here we go. Here's one from Irene. I'm a campus minister for Hispanic students. What can Catholic colleges and universities as well as college students do to support and accompany immigrants and refugees? Sister Tracy or Martin, I'll let you guys decide who to answer that.
This is Sister Tracy. I would say that, an accompaniment team isn't exclusive necessarily to a congregation. So I could really imagine it being powerful to train a group of students to participate in accompaniment. And, then always, it requires some work to get connected to organizations who are, on the front lines with immigrants who would be seeking accompaniment. But I absolutely think that this would be a great experience for students. And potentially, I know some students at our local universities and colleges who have family members who are undocumented. And so, really making that connection could be powerful.
So, Irene, I see here that you're up in the Philadelphia area. If you have more specific questions, I invite you to go ahead and send an email to Sarah, and maybe she can put you in touch with Sister Tracy, or Sarah might have some other ideas for you. But thank you for the question, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to keep in touch with you. Let's see here. Oh, hey, Sarah, this looks like a question for you. It's from our good friend Sarah Damewood in South Carolina. What are the components of the training program for this?
So we're currently just in the early stages of development, but we're hoping to get a toolkit out that can kind of answer some of these questions of kind of like what would, and it really, I feel like, depends on the community that you're in and what are those specific needs. So I don't know if Martin or Sister Tracy have any ideas about or can share anything about how they go about training folks.
I could share. This is Sister Tracy. We have some kind of basic things that we tend to do with our groups, and that's we start with an immigrant who shares their testimony to give some of that perspective about what they're experiencing. And then we do some, faith reflection about what is it from our own faith traditions that calls us into this. And just conversation around how we personally are feeling called in this moment, what it might be like to be in that vulnerable situation, and just kind of processing, what people might be seeking in those experiences, where are the places that people are really vulnerable in our community? What do we already know about that? And then kind of moving through a traditional accompaniment experience or rapid response, and what the different components are, the different ways that people can plug in, giving some specific examples. We do some training around what are people's rights if they encounter ICE or the police at their home or in public. What are our rights as attending, being in the courtroom, accompanying people, and what is generally the role. What are people seeking in being accompanied, and then asking people to actually discern what their commitment would be. What ways are they willing to show up for people? So that's just kind of like a broad brush overview of the conversations that we have in doing our training.
Great, Sister Tracy. Thank you. This is for Sister Mary Jude, but I think there are going to be some other folks who want copies of this webinar. So if you could, please, I just typed in Sarah Haas's email address here at the USCCB. So if you do want a copy of the webinar, if you want to get some more information about the CARE program, please do. Type your email address in the chat box, and we'll get it to you as soon as we have everything formatted and ready to go. Yeah, and Martin, I'm sorry, I didn't mute your audio. Folks, Martin Ford in San Francisco, I think, is trying to contribute to the discussion, but his audio seems to be muted. Martin, you might need to press *1 to try and get back on. But yeah, I didn't mute your audio on this end. And Martin says, Sister Tracy, you spoke eloquently with an exclamation point.
Well,
folks, folks, we are coming right up to the top of the hour, 3 p.m. over here on the East Coast, and almost noon on the West Coast. I see that folks are typing in their email addresses as we're getting close to the hour. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you, everybody. I mean, we had a really good turnout. I had 53 people on the webinar just from a few minutes ago. So thank you, everybody, for spending an hour with us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Sarah. Her email address is right there on your screen. You all should have my email address too. So if you want to send me a question or a request, I can forward that to Sarah. I'm happy to do it. So everyone, well, let's see. This is the last Sunday this is the last week of the in ordinary time. So next week is Advent. So happy Advent, or early happy Advent. Thank you for spending time with us, and please take care of yourselves. We'll have another webinar real soon. Thanks, Sister Tracy. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Sarah. Take care. Bye-bye.